Hello and welcome to the Jessica Pinelli podcast, Shelby. Good morning from Australia. Hello to you in Miami. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, of course. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to speak about your topic, and I'm actually going to start with reading a little bit of a caption of one of your posts that I really, really loved and resonated with. And I feel that a lot of my audience are going to resonate with. Then I kind of want to dive into that. So, part of this post says, the secret is in your desire type. Just because you don't spontaneously want to climb your partner like a tree doesn't mean your libido doesn't work or there's something wrong with you. In fact, it means you're perfectly normal. You're just operating from the wrong understanding of arousal and desire. The understanding society wants you to believe that sex happens spur of the moment when their passion becomes too much that they just have to have the person when they just have to have the person. Now, don't get me wrong, that can happen, but that's not the way to have the best sex. Can you explain this? Can you go into it and share? Because I'm sure there's so many people that probably may live in the fantasy of seeing movies and books and thinking that sex has to be a passionate thing all of the time. We always want to rip our partner's clothes off.
Yeah, so this is, one of my favorite things to talk about. I could go on and on here. So feel free to stop me, but it's because this is the question that comes up most often in my work is people come to me because they think that something is broken in themselves or in their relationship because their desire for sex has changed. And so it's exactly like it says in that post, like you're talking about, that passion, that jump their bones, that spontaneous desire is a part of sex and intimacy and desire. But most people probably fall into the responsive desire category. And that is where life is happening, right? There are other things going on around you. And so you might see something sexual, your partner might try to initiate something, but there are like 20 steps between where you are and getting into that sexy mood. And you might be able to get there. You might be able to say, I'm open to taking steps in that direction. But that first starts with understanding that it's not a bad thing that your partner is turned on and aroused right now and you're just like simply not ready for it. And that could take you 2 hours to get there. That could take you 2 days of foreplay or of physical intimacy to get you then in the mood to have that. And if that is the case, if it does take 2 days for you, there's nothing wrong with you. That just simply means that there are so many things going on in your life that are acting as breaks to that sexual desire that it just takes you a little bit to get there. And understanding that and accepting that really is, in my opinion, like the first stage of the work that I do, mostly with women, because we are trained to believe that our partner slapped our ass and we should just be like, oh, yes, like I'm ready for it now. No, life is happening, work, kids, whatever, what have you. So, desire types in that misconception and misportrayal, right, of what we're seeing is, like I said, probably one of my favorite topics. And I could go on and on there because I think everybody needs to hear it. And most of us aren't taught that, right?
Definitely. And this is definitely a conversation I've had with my own partner, with my friends as well. Why do you believe, or what's the reasoning behind first getting into a relationship and probably going from having sex all of the time, being super attracted to, let's say, maybe someone who's listening, they're a couple of years into the relationship. They know they're still attracted to their partner. They still want to have sex, but the desire just isn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the way that I like to explain this is, of course, in the beginning of a relationship, there is a lot of newness that plays into it, a lot of excitement, right? Kind of the roller coaster of dating. And does he like me? Is he intimate? Is he intimate? Is he into me for intimacy, right? So all of those things are at play at the beginning, and that kind of helps you to have like that passion, that lust, right? What we typically think of as desire. And then what happens in a long-term relationship is the roles change. So maybe you have been in this relationship for years and you just moved in together, and so now there you are sexual partners, but you're also roommates. Maybe you guys have kids together, and so now you're also co-parents, and you're also divvying up chores. You're somebody's creating the chores, somebody is doing the tasks, right? Somebody is checking up on somebody. In a lot of relationship dynamics, there's like a mothering that goes on. So all of these roles then take away from the amount of time that we're in that like sexual partner role, right? And so a lot of times what happens in that long-term relationship is, okay, so you're balancing all these roles together. You know, he didn't put his socks in the laundry basket for like the millionth time. You feel like you're nagging him, and then you're also in the back of your head saying, wow, it's been like 3 weeks since we've had sex. Like, I am not into him at all right now. Like, I don't even want him to touch me and think we're leading towards sex, because you have all of these conflicting messages, these conflicting roles going on within you. And then what happens in that long-term relationship, you know, then you set out a specific date night, right? So you say, like, tonight we're going on a date night. There's all this pressure, there's all this expectation. You're like, oh man, like, it's been so long. We really have to have sex tonight. You've got all of this pressure on it. And then at the end of the night, you know, maybe a conversation went wrong, or you had too much to eat. You had some pasta. If I had some pasta, it's not happening after that date night, you know? And so I think because of that pressure, because of that buildup, because of the expectation of, well, we should be having this sex, then maybe you have it out of obligation. There's not the actual like connection to intimacy. And the reason why we want to have sex is because of connection. It's pleasurable. We enjoy it. We feel connected to our partner. We feel connected to ourselves. So when you have it and you don't experience any of those rewards, then you don't want it again anytime soon. You're like, oh man, you know, it's been so long, and that's kind of how it went. And well, at least I can wait another 3 weeks until I have to deal with this again. And so that change in desire is completely normal because, like I said, you have all these roles going on. And it's about understanding, okay, what kind of sexual play can we do frequently, quickly? You know, what's a way that both of us can connect physically, intimately, that only takes a couple of minutes. Maybe you like to slow dance, right? You like to slow dance in the kitchen when you're making a meal, your bodies are pressed up against each other. And that can be more satisfying to you intimately than having sex out of obligation after a date night. You fake an orgasm and you feel further away after that.
What are your thoughts on scheduling in sex? If it is something you're realizing, okay, I'm 2 months, it's been 2 months, we haven't had sex, we've barely been intimate. And yes, keeping in factors, people may have kids or lives, careers, businesses are busy. But what is your kind of outlook on scheduling that in? Because I know from conversations in my own personal life that some of my friends are like, I'm all for it. I think that's great. The ones that have kids and are busy, and some other people think, no, I would never do that. It takes away the intimacy for me.
Mm. So that's such a good point, talking about your friends. And I think there's two sides of it, which is fair. I'm all for planning intimacy. That doesn't have to mean planning sex. That can mean planning a bath together, a massage together. If it leads to sex, great, but like, we're not setting that expectation. But for the friends of yours that said, well, that takes away from the romance, that goes back to the idea that that spontaneous desire is the only thing that's sexy. And if we look at actual sexual satisfaction, was it that you were more satisfied with that moment that was off the cuff, or it was off the cuff because you felt romantically connected to your partner, you felt emotionally bare, right? There was some deeper connection that led to this spontaneity that is really where we owe our sexual satisfaction, as opposed to just the fact that it was random, right? Because if we're in that long-term relationship, the random is probably because we finally feel that connection and we're like, yes, I've missed this,
I know that
right?
you started to touch on it. You said something like it starts when your partner, he leaves his socks out, he doesn't put it in the laundry basket. What are some things that you've seen in the work that you've done with women, with partners that really do, and maybe the listeners can start to identify, oh, this is actually what's causing me to not want to be intimate. This is what's making me feel disconnected, even though I think, oh, it's been 2 weeks, we should have sex. But by the time we get to it, I can't get turned on, or I feel further away than ever. What are these small things that you start to see that build resentment?
Yeah, that's a great one. And it goes back to the roles that everybody's playing. So, something that is really going to breed resentment in a long term relationship is feeling like things aren't split evenly. And not in a way of like splitting chores evenly, but in a way of like splitting the emotional burden evenly, right? That like you are able to lean on your partner when you need that, and he's also able, or they are also able to do that with you, and that kind of bi-directional aspect is, even if we're looking at averages, right? If we're looking at a whole. So what breeds up is the resentment of like, I did this for you and I was there for you for this, and I can't have this little bit of grace in not wanting to have sex, right? Often the conversation ends up being, the man says like, you're withholding sex from me, and the woman says, well, you're withholding hugs and hand holding and physical intimacy from me because you want sex. And they're saying, well, if you gave me this, then I would give you that, right? It's that kind of like chicken and egg back and forth scenario. And I think what's really important when that happens is to understand the context that really turns you on. Okay, so, and I don't mean like the Marvin Gaye song and like the candles lit. I mean like the house is clean
Mm.
and you just had an everything shower, and work is not stressing you out. You didn't just read an email, right? Maybe the house is empty if you have kids. Like understanding the context for you physically, for you emotionally. Like, are you in a good place with your body? Are you in a good place with your mental health, with your parents? Like, all of these little factors can mean everything to one person and nothing to somebody else when it comes to the context for them to like want to have sex. So what I like to do is create a pleasure playbook. So it's a playbook similar to like a football playbook, where you say, okay, this is exactly like the setting, the emotions, the chores, like this is the state that all of these things are in when I feel my sexiest. And then you go to your partner and you say, hey, I need these 4 things to be checked off for me to even consider sex. It's Thursday. Do you think we could like work on these and maybe have them done by Sunday, and then we can revisit like having this conversation about sex, or wherever we're at with that. And being able to kind of share and understand that load to avoid that building resentment, right? To where you don't even want to look at your partner. You don't even want to think about touching them or having sex with them.
What do you do if your partner's not receptive? You're listening to this, you're consuming your work and everything you put on your Instagram, listening to this episode, you go and do it, and your partner shuts you down or says that's stupid, or says, what are you
Mm.
talking about? We don't need to listen to that.
Hmm. That's such a great point. And because I don't work with couples, I work with women. So that is something that my clients are faced with constantly, right? Where they're in this relationship and they're learning so much and they just want to go to their partner and be like, hey, like maybe if we try it like this, I could be into it. But years of hurts and like little wounds have kind of pushed that possibility out of it. Where I like to start in that scenario is like, you can always start with yourself, right? That's the only thing we can really change, anyways. And so, just as much of my course is exploring your own sexuality, like masturbation, right? How does it look for personal play? Mirror work, right? Even just like exploring your own body and your own confidence in your own parts. And a lot of times, just being that example, right? If if you say to your partner, oh, I've been listening to this great thing, I'm really turned on, I'm actually just going to go masturbate for like 20 minutes. Did you want to come watch me? Or, not even, they walk in on you and you're doing it and they're like, wait, what is going on here? What is this like awakening that's happening within you where you want to engage in this? And that's going to pique their curiosity, because at the end of the day, I've never met man nor woman in a relationship that, after being sexually satisfied or after seeing their partner have like this sexual awakening, they're like, oh, let's go back to the way it was before. I actually don't love that on you.
Mm.
Everybody wants that. Everybody does.
I want to touch on the self pleasure part. I know that sometimes it can be taboo for someone in a relationship to think they can't self pleasure, or
Mm.
the only type of sex they can have is with their partner. What would you say to the women that are listening to this that are like, oh, okay, so is it okay if I still self pleasure and have those times to myself? And what if my partner does it? Does it mean he or she doesn't want to be with me?
Yeah, so this goes back to what we're talking about, the cultural portrayal of things like self-pleasure, masturbation. Even the word masturbation makes people really uncomfortable. We typically have moments in our childhood, like a parent walking in on us walking in on a parent, even as young as like little babies touching themselves, and parents or somebody being like, oh no, don't do that, don't do that, bad, not teaching proper words for people's body parts. There are so many barriers to our sexuality, right? Religious, cultural, familial, medical, and it is a journey. There, I will say, like, if you are at a place right now where you're like, there is no way that I can even begin to touch myself, that's totally okay. Understanding that there are other beliefs at play in the reason why you feel that way. And maybe all you need to do is just start journaling on that. Just start unpacking your own beliefs about sex. And like, if that's where you start and you don't touch yourself or look at yourself in a mirror or do any of those things, that's totally okay, because everybody's journey to sexuality is so different. And especially if you've been taught that it is shameful, sinful, wrong, your process is going to look a little different. And I think I have a tendency to like be in people's face because I'm like, yes, let's talk about masturbation. Have you ever touched yourself? And that can just, people
Mm.
immediately, they're so taken aback by that because typically we think of like a crunchy sock or like a man hunched in the corner as masturbation. And like there's a portal to have children be born. There is an opportunity for creation and expansion and fulfillment in that is just far more beautiful than anybody can comprehend. And if you're like any step or inch on that journey, I commend you for that. And I just hope that, you keep going.
Absolutely. When did you start sharing this stuff and teaching all of this? Because obviously with social media, it can be such a taboo thing, and it can be a topic where it's like, why are you speaking about that on social media? So where did this start? I also know that you're a yogi. Where did the two combine?
Yeah, so it's kind of a circuitous journey. I never set out to be like, I'm gonna be a sex coach. That sounds amazing. I was always hypersexual. I was always very interested in sex. I have my own like sexual traumas, as a lot of women do, as a lot of people do, and all of those things led me to a curiosity about sexuality. I was always questioning things. I was always trying to understand pleasure. When I was 22, I did Love and Sex Addicts Anonymous, so that was a big awakening into the combining of my sexual side and my spiritual side. Through all that, I got my yoga teacher trainings and meditation certifications and things of that nature. I got my master's in mental health counseling. And through all of this experience that was my life, right? Through all of these experiences, I noticed where my conversations were naturally going was this combination of sex and spirituality. And there's a tantra yoga, which really is the embodiment, the practice, the understanding of where those two things intersect. And I found so much, not only so much interest there, but so much worth there. So that's where kind of my hyper focus, I started to dive into like really what are the differences between like sex and religion, sex and spirituality, like sex and yoga. How do all of these things, all of these interests intersect? And that's where my work was born. I started because I've been so open about sex. I have been talking about sex toys on my personal Instagram from probably like college days. So everybody had that perspective of me, I would say, like in my world already. And then once it became um, like my passion, my career, making that transition from like talking about it to like friends' moms and like old
Mm.
teachers, it just became like kind of this natural confidence in being able to speak about it with strangers. And like you said, because it's still so taboo on social media, it's really hard to find the right wording to even
Mm.
be able to connect to people. And like I told you, I tend to be like more in your face. If I've been talking about sex toys on my stories, then I'm not going to come up with cutesy names for kind of other anatomical parts, for other important things. But Instagram, TikTok, they kind of make you do that a little bit. So that's, I will say, definitely been a struggle of society's perception of it and like how you want to actually bring that education to social media.
Why do you think it is still so taboo on social media?
I think because it can be taken, sex education in general, a lot of the anti sex education conversation is that it is opening up younger and younger children to something that isn't for them, something that should only be for adults, right? It can be taken from something good to something bad really quickly, I think. And the potential for children to be exploited in that way and to be taken advantage of in that way, I think is why social media still
Mm.
reins it in so much. But I am personally of the belief that like sex education at a younger age does not make children more sexual. It makes them more responsible. And that's really like the direction that I would like to see social media and sex and that conversation change is just, educating. Education is power. Education is never going to bring someone down. So, yeah.
What do you think schools can do better about sex education? I don't know how it is in the States, but I know from my own experience, I went to a Catholic high school. And so the sex education, there was none. It was abstinence. So that was all I learned. And thankfully I had a mum who would have a conversation with me. But what do you think needs to be improved across the board and why?
This is a tough conversation to have, especially, being in the United States right now, where in general, like healthcare, women's healthcare, rights, contraceptives, like our own bodies are not, we're not allowed to have autonomy over our bodies in certain places. So each state is different when it comes to sex education in the school systems. And I can't even begin to speak on those differences. I've got no idea there. I know the sex education that I received. I know the trend that America, especially like the southeastern United States, is heading when it comes to taking away things like basic healthcare information, women's rights. So I think this is all one conversation, right? And our sex education should include more about your menstrual cycle, about the phases of your menstrual cycle, about working with women when it comes to how often we can actually get pregnant, with contraceptives for birth control for both sides, for all ends of the gender spectrum. There is like so much work that can be done in that area. And I don't know where it starts, honestly. I would love to say just like a uniform sex and gender education in elementary schools would be lovely. But I don't even know. You run across, especially in the United States, and I don't know how this works in Australia. You run across so many differences just across state lines of what is science, what is fact. And so that's where it becomes really hard to implement that in schools without just like a truly regulated across the board. This is what we're going to teach, and it's going to be the basics on, your bodies, your body parts, your cycles, your hormones, and also, sexual pleasure and satisfaction. So
It's crazy,
a
isn't it? I
lofty
think,
goal.
yeah, I think that in Australia, it's definitely a bit more uniformed, but I didn't know, I knew to a degree, but I didn't realize that every single state in the US kind of has a different way of teaching. I love that you brought up the menstrual cycle. That is something now as I've gotten older, I was put on the pill when I was 16. I was on the pill for about 10, 11 years, and I've been off it now, I think coming up 4 or 5 years. One of the best things I did to come off of it, but learning about my menstrual cycle over the past couple of years, learning how it actually affects my body, where I'm at in my cycle when it comes to my personal life, when it comes to running my business as well, has been transformational. And when I have conversations with my friends who have also learned and we're educating ourselves and they've come off the birth contraceptive pill, I think it's crazy. It's insane that this isn't something that is taught in school to women. I think that it's doing us a disservice. And until I started to do my own research, until I came off the contraceptive pill, I was like, there is a whole world of knowledge that as a female, I'm only learning. When did I start to this? At 27, 28 years old. And I'm about to go into my 30s. And now this is like a new world to me. And so, do you have many women that come to you that are of all ages that maybe have no idea how to work with their menstrual cycle, don't even really know how it works? And what do you think about this and the education around it?
Yeah, so I am just like you and like many women. I was 13 years old, put on birth control. You have these symptoms. This should clear it up, and you're not going to get pregnant. And take it, at the same time every day. And there's no other education around that, or real discussion of like side effects and what it's actually doing to your cycle. And so, just like you, after 10 years I get off it and I go on this journey of what does my body actually do, what are my actual mood levels and mood swings, and the signs, the warning signs that my body is giving me through all these phases. And so I will say the same thing for running my business. That has been huge for me, like such a game changer in just giving yourself the grace to not be firing on all cylinders every single day of the month. And then for my clients coming in, I do work with a lot of, perimenopausal, menopausal women, because that really is where you have a massive change in desire because your hormones are changing so much. And it's not specifically sex related, as most people think, like, oh, my hormones are changing, so that's why the sex is changing. It's more that everything is changing, right? When you're in that menopause, in that phase of your life, everything is changing so drastically that sex tends to be kind of one of the last things on the list. And you don't even really understand now how your body is working, how your body is going to respond to those things. It's the same thing, arguably, when women get off hormonal birth control and they say, okay, well, I don't get wet like I used to, or, my drive is completely gone. It's the same thing with antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds, and they're saying that has drastically changed my libido. It's because your body's functioning, it has to adjust to these things. It has to adjust to being on the pill, being off the pill. And when you are trying to understand your body like that, something that is really vulnerable and makes your body very bare and very vulnerable is very hard to drum up the desire for. If you're feeling bloated, or you're uncertain where these mood swings are coming from, or your body is just changing. And so I think, once again, that grace and that conversation of sexual frequency, like, why does it actually matter how much we're having sex if we're satisfied with our sex? So if you go off birth control and for 2 months you have no desire at all, but then after that you have the best sex of your life because your body feels balanced, and you're finally understanding where you're at, then why does it matter if you had a 2-month dry spell, right?
I love that. What would you say is in a relationship, how long would you gauge it for a partnership of not having sex to maybe have a serious conversation about, okay, where is this relationship heading romantically and sexually?
So that's going to be different for every partnership. And I'm not going to say a number, because then people are going to latch onto that number as the statistic that the barometer that they have to measure their sex life against. And what I would like to, pose as the counter there is, what is the desired frequency of sex from both partners? Does that match up, first of all, to begin with? Um, are there areas of sex that both partners would still like to explore? Like, is there a reason why, essentially, there has become this rift? Or is it just like context dependent, work crazy, we haven't made it a priority? Or is there like a significant mismatch in maybe attraction or interest in the person? Because if you go 6 months without having sex because it's COVID and nobody knows what's going on, and you're just like trying to get through every single day, then, I'd say that 6 months is nothing. If you are at your peak and loving everything about your life and you cannot find any kind of desire for your partner, then maybe after 6 months, yeah, you need to sit down. You need to have this conversation. You need to say, like, why is this happening? What is your desired frequency? What is your interest when it comes to sexual capacity? Because there are people who are asexual who say, sex twice a year, like, that's actually enough for me. And if their partner is okay with that, if that's like an agreed upon situation or understanding, then great. You guys can move forward. And if it's been 6 months, that's okay. You're like, oh, time's up. Okay. Like, I might be into it now. And you move forward. But it's where there is a heavy mismatch. And this is where like the concept of, I have a low libido and he has a high libido. And so we're just not matched up like that. I go back to, okay, where's like the sexual satisfaction? If he has a high libido and you're like, masturbate, do your thing, I only want to have sex with you like once a month, and you guys are both okay with that, like that is sexually satisfying to both partners, then why does it matter how long it's been or how often you're having it? But if there's like a serious kink or interest or something, and that's where the mismatch is, and he's like, I want to have sex outside all the time, that's the only way I get turned on, and you're like, I will never ever in my life do that, that's when you question the relationship itself, right? You try and find the compromise if there is one, but you question, like, do we need to be in a monogamous relationship? If I'm never going to give that to you, and that is your number one thing that you want, am I okay with you going elsewhere to find that with like some clearly defined rules? Or would I just like to end this relationship arrangement so that you can go seek something more in line with what you want and I can go seek something more in line with what I want?
For the women listening to my podcast, because I do have majority women listeners, and they're resonating with this, and they're freaking out, and they're thinking, well, how do I even start with a conversation with that? They've listened to this entire episode and they're starting to see, maybe a monogamous relationship isn't for me, but I still want to be with my partner. Where have you experienced this with your own clients, that maybe that has happened? Or where would you start with the communication piece, or exploring, is that what I really want? Or am I thinking it's going to be a fixer for this relationship and our sex
Mm-hmm.
life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, with communication about any tough conversation, but especially about sex, if you've never had those conversations, a great way to start that is to say, oh, I was listening to this podcast. She said this thing. What do you think about that? You don't have to relate it back to your sex life at all for your partner to know that's where this is going. And they can, take that lifeline and start to open up that conversation. As soon as you are able to just have those conversations, right? You've kind of checked off that first box of, hey, I heard this, or I just watched this. Like, what do you think about that move that they're doing? Then you can begin to relate it about your own sex life. So I always say, never talking about sex when you're in the bedroom or you've just had sex or you're just about to have sex, right? We want kind of like a low stakes environment. You're going for a walk. Maybe you're not even looking each other in the eye. And you can just say, with a classic shit sandwich. I'm sure you've heard of that. You just say, like, hey, I love you. I want to connect to you deeper. These are some feelings that I've been having around group sex or having somebody watch us, or, maybe this isn't being fulfilled here. I still want to connect to you deeper. These are things I've been thinking about and I'm trying to be vulnerable here. What do you feel about that? And I know not everybody has that open of a relationship. And if you don't, putting it on paper, like I've got something a lot of sex educators have. It's called a yes, no, maybe checklist. And it essentially lists out, all kinds of things that you can do sexually intimately, right? Like from licking and kissing and sucking to like really basics like dressing up or group play or voyeurism. And what you do is you put, yes, I'm interested in trying this, no, this is a hard no for me, or maybe, right? Like this is something I could be interested in. And that could be an exercise that you do with your partner separately. You both fill out the list, you bring the lists together and you say, oh, that's weird. We have this overlap of blindfolds and we've never done that before. I didn't know you were into that. And they said, I didn't know you were into that either because we've never had this conversation. So there are ways in low stakes environment, right, where you can bring that up and you can start to just open the conversation, right? For most people, I would say that door is probably closed or like barely cracked. And you're if all you get from this is that you're opening the conversation and you're available to trying something that maybe you always thought was not available to you, then that I would say is a win. We've done our job, Jessica.
I love that. I love that. Something that came up as you were speaking for the women that are listening and they have kids, because I know that I have a couple of friends, they have kids, and it's kind of like, oh, if sex happens, it happens. And so, what would you
Mhm.
say to those women that have kids? Maybe it's a brand new kid, or maybe they're onto their third, and they truly are listening. They're like, I do want to have more sex. I do want to make this work, but I just don't see the possibility in the busy life between looking after children, cleaning a house, cooking dinner. Maybe they go to work again. What would you say to those women?
So, a frightening fact about sex in children, or maybe comforting, I hope it's comforting, is that they say that research says that until your youngest is 6 years old, things in your relationship as a whole, but also in your sexual dynamic, they won't look the same as they did before. So if you have 3 kids, only when the youngest is 6 years old. So that could be like 12 years of your life where sex is just looking greatly different than it used to be. Number one, like that's okay. That's totally normal, right? Like that is where everybody else is. And if everybody's telling you they're having sex 3 times a week, they're probably lying. Okay. But sex is a habit like anything else. It's the same with, working out. Like you probably don't have time to work out, but if it's a priority enough, you'll find the time. The same can be true for sex. But once again, what are we defining as sex? Not just like P and V penetration. Okay, we tied the bow on that, we had sex. Maybe it is just a little bit of foreplay and then you both go to bed. Maybe it is that physical intimacy of a hug or a kiss or just like making out for making out's sake. Like that is all sexual play.
Mm.
So, what are we defining as sex? And can we do that often, right? If we have multiple definitions of it, can we just like incorporate that in? And also, if we can't, that's totally normal. That's totally okay. It does return and you have to work at it like anything else.
I love that you brought up the fact that sex is different things and it's not just the penetration. And I think that's an important fact to bring up for everyone listening to this, because I know I definitely grew up with believing sex is only if it's penetration. And so anything outside of that, really, until I got into this long term relationship that I'm in, anything outside of that, it doesn't count. And I'm sure that you have coached many women that have had the same belief system. Isn't it crazy that we think those things don't count?
It's so funny to me. And I always think back to high school when you're like, oh, we did everything but sex. And you're like, I'm still a virgin because we didn't have penetrative intercourse. And if we look at, you know, same sex couples, like that sometimes doesn't ever enter the equation. If we look at sexual satisfaction in general, that is actually a woman's least favorite type of sexual activity is penetration. And so why is that what we're defining sex as, right? Like can't sex be all of these different things? I teach something called meditate to masturbate, and I teach women how to have an orgasm from meditation. So like from specifically only using your mind. And I had somebody say to me like, that's not masturbation, that's not sex, like that's not an orgasm. And I'm like, call it what you want to call it, but that what I just experienced, what I've
Mm.
taught you to experience, right? That is as close a link as I can make to an orgasm. And so that's what I love to do, is just like question these beliefs, these ideas that we've been taught about like what sex is and what it should be. And like let's change the narrative, and what feels good. And like can we call that sex, and can we do more of that?
Mm.
That's the goal.
Yeah, I think following what feels good in the bedroom. I absolutely love everything that you stand for, Shelby. I think this is an important conversation. I think Instagrams like yours, there needs to be more. There needs to be more conversations like this that is normalized and for women and men to have a voice and to break the shame and the stigma around sex. And every time I get to the end of a podcast interview, I have a list of questions and I pick their very random questions and I pick to ask the guest and to see what their answer would be. And I'm thinking, what do I want to ask Shelby? So I think I'm going to ask you maybe, okay, if you could distill your life's philosophy or a piece of advice into a single sentence, what would it be?
Find what feels good and do more of that,
Mm,
not just in sex, right? That applies to all areas of everything. I am on a mission to live a life that I would love, that I look back at and I'm like, that felt fucking amazing. And if it doesn't feel good, we're not faking it here. Enough is enough.
I love that. I agree. If it doesn't feel good, why are we doing it? And to apply that to all areas of our life and to find the inspiration and the excitement in life. I love that. I think that's very fitting for this entire episode. I appreciate you so much. This has been absolutely incredible. I know that all of the listeners have probably gotten so much juicy stuff and probably starting to develop a bit of courage to have different conversations with their partners and even conversations with themselves and to explore what's coming up in their own mind. Where can everyone find you, work with you? What do you have going on?
Yes, I love that. So if anything about this has piqued your interest, my Instagram, my TikTok, my YouTube, it's all Meditate X Shelby Tate. And if you are a woman who has resonated with this message, I do run a 10-week course. It's called From Meh to Mind Blowing for women who want more from sex. So I urge you to come join us. It's so much fun. It's so informational. We're wild and loud and a little bit naughty, and I love it.
I love that. And all of those details will be in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Shelby, for your time and your expertise. This has been absolutely great. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. This has been so much fun.